Recording. Oops. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Phi Chat. I'm Drew Kerwood, the Associate Director for Prevention and Wellness with Phi Sigma Kappa, and we also have with us Devin Bazil from Phi Psi. Devin, want to say hi?
Hey, everyone. This is Devin Basili from Phi Kappa Psi, Senior Director for Member Development.
As some of you may know, Phi Chats began over the summer as a partnership between Phi Sigma Kappa and Phi Kappa Psi. Both organizations saw a need to offer free informational sessions to its members about issues facing chapters and college students in unprecedented times. To view previously recorded Phi Chats, you can visit Phi Kappa Psi's YouTube page or under the programs section of their website. And for Phi Sig, you can visit the My Phi Sig platform and find all the recordings there. I encourage you to check back as we add more and more recordings of Phi Chats to those locations, so you can review those conversations and use them as a nice conversation starter in your chapter. For today's Phi Chat, we are joined by Chris Schrimscher, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how to have a tough conversation. And Chris, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself and introduce the topic. So, all you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. So the conversation today, a topic that is something that I find really relevant when I was an active, and then as an alumni and as an advisor, this has always been a topic of mind. So today I'm going to present on tough conversations within fraternity life, which seems odd until I break it down a little bit further. But a little bit about me. One sec. There we go. So like Drew said, my name is Chris Schrimscher. I was active back in winter 2011. I graduated in fall 2014 from Eastern Michigan University. I held many different positions, and then I became the chapter advisor in about 2015. I have a master's degree in mental health counseling. I've worked on crisis lines. I work with children, adolescents, and young adults. And so not only is this something that is really a topic that I'm familiar with on a personal level, but I'm also a professional mental health counselor now, and that's somewhat recent. So it's exciting for me. I do note that my presentation style is a little bit different. I don't see myself as much of a lecturer. I'm very much a therapist. I'm very much into having discussions open and honest with other people. I often use humor to diffuse heavy topics. I've tried not to use it so much in this presentation. And as far as the discussions I like to lead, whether it is with my guys at Eastern Michigan, or if it's just with my friends, I prefer honest, open conversations over getting BS answers because I know them all. So I figured I'd cover the ground rules. So what tough stuff or what tough conversations are we talking about when I'm talking about having really open, honest conversations and the importance of that within the university or the Phi Sig or within your fraternity itself. So mental illness, specifically depression, anxiety, things like that, substance use and abuse, and then the topic of suicide. The format of this talk is really simple. I'm hoping to have a little bit of discussion where we can have honest conversations. I'd ask the people here attending to participate. And if you are somebody at home watching this, feel free to just jot some notes down. I have a quick piece that's a disclosure piece and relevant to why I'm presenting. And frankly, I set that up partially to show you a little bit about my life and the work that I do, but also in asking you to be open and honest. I want to be open and honest as well. I included some facts, just why this is relevant, a scenario to kind of break down some of the facts and things that we've talked about. And then I'd like you to walk away with some resources and things that you can do in your own chapter. The quick rules: were really simple. It's just respect other folks that are sharing during the discussion. And then if somebody is talking about something that's really personal, it's best not to ask really private, intimate, specific pieces. And I can be pretty open about that and what that looks like as I talk and as other people talk as well. So first, just opening up a discussion, kind of just checking in with people. I ask that people be open and engaged. Once again, if you're somebody that's looking at this from home, feel free to just jot some thoughts down, write down words that stick out, and then I can kind of break those down as we go. So one of the first things that I included is actually a takeaway, but I think it's one of the most important things that my chapter does back at Eastern Michigan that really just checks in with people. So it's called Gripes and Roses, and there are various versions of that. But simply, gripes are personal shares that are somewhat negative, they're not ideal. Roses, in contrast, are positive, more ideal. And then we ended in Phi Sig with a rose for being damn proud. And you can do any version with any type of saying that fits your fraternity specifically. So I'd love to just be able to do like a quick share two pieces, gripes and roses with the folks that are here. And then if you're at home, you don't have to participate in this one. So I'll go first. So I have a rose for just graduating. So it took me a little while in graduate school to complete it, but I completed it on time in this program, 397, worked my butt off, and now I'm a mental health counselor. So that was a big rose for me. And then a rose because I just found a job in the field that I want, doing the type of therapy that I want. But I have a gripe because it took me a few months and things can be really slow with licensing. And then I have a gripe because COVID kind of sucks. So it's not always ideal. And then I have a rose for being damn proud. Who wants to go next?
I can go, Chris.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I have a rose for an interview for the director of community planning where I work tomorrow. I have a gripe for 6+ months of mostly working from home. And I got a rose because I'm damn proud.
Cool. Who's going next?
I got first a rose for having this presentation, Chris. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
A rose. My 1-year wedding anniversary was 2 days ago. That's fun. Another gripe would be, yeah, COVID sucks, but the rose being able to go into the office is somewhat nice. And then rose for being damn proud.
I can go. A gripe for me right now is just today. Earlier today was kind of a low energy, low motivation day, but I kind of worked my way back out of that. And I guess a rose would be I got decided to do a lot of plant work today. So repotting a lot of plants and making sure that they're all ready to go for the winter. And that's making me feel good, pulling me up out of my rut from earlier today. So
my rose is that a couple weeks ago was my birthday, and it was my first one away from my hometown because I recently moved to Indy. So it was, a rose was all the people who reached out, even if we were living far away from each other. And a gripe is that my puppy hasn't been sleeping very well, which means I'm not sleeping very well. He's having tummy trouble sometimes, so I gotta attend to that as we need to. But I'm sure we'll work through it. Plenty of coffee.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, guys. Let me just switch it back. So I do want to give a little bit of context afterward. So one of the reasons why this simple sharing activity is really interesting is because it opens up the conversation about what's going on in the lives of the people around us. So not only am I talking about tough conversations, but I'm actually talking about conversations in general that sometimes we don't have, particularly as fraternity men that aren't always comfortable talking about things going on in our life. And so the way that I see Gripes and Roses is often an opportunity to share what's going on. And that can be really tough sometimes. And there are people that really struggle with this activity and just do some basic things. But I would always encourage people to really dig deep and be open and honest with your brothers. My chapter specifically does Gripes and Roses about every month or so at meeting. That's how we start meeting. And then we have another activity called Character Talk, which I will mention later as one of the takeaways that people can have. But always, it's just an opportunity to be open and honest with people that you might not share a lot of time with. So one of the first things I wanted to do in opening up this idea of having tough conversations is having a good sense of the way in which you feel comfortable sharing your own things. Initially, when I started this conversation, I really wanted to create a discussion and a conversation where I can approach a friend that I think is struggling and I can approach them. And I'll definitely teach you those skills because I think those are important. But I think in taking a step back for a second, I also wanted to acknowledge how difficult that is as just people that go through things. And what would I do if somebody came to me and asked me how my day was, or noticed something was going on and wanted to have a conversation? How comfortable would I be opening up about that? And then I actually flipped it. Just this idea that if I had really good news in my life, who are the people that I would want to share that information with? It's interesting. In the age of technology, we can often be communicating with 20 people a week, something like that. But how often are we sharing things that truly impact us? So for this one, I wanted to check in with ourselves. And because of the group that popped up today, I won't have them share answers. But I just want people at home that are looking at this to kind of reflect on this. On a scale from 0 to 10, how likely would you be to approach a brother, a friend? Would you tell a significant other this? Would you tell your parents? So I have a breakup. So if you just broke up with your significant other, who are the people that you're going to tell? Are you going to wait a few days? God forbid, what if somebody in your family was hospitalized, or there was a passing in your family? Who would you tell if you had a really, really good date? If you were struggling with a class, is that something you would even share with your brothers? And then I also put being accepted into a graduate program and dream internship. It's so interesting. I don't like to put my personal stuff on Facebook. And so I know that's how a lot of people share information. But to me, that doesn't feel personal. And for me, I would rather share with certain people. I also want to give a disclaimer right off the back that I'm a therapist and I hear people's personal stuff all the time, but I am not the best at sharing. And so it's completely okay if you're that type of person as well. But then I want to get into checking in with chapter. And I think that this is where it becomes really relevant, is within the scheme of the fraternity, within the scheme of chapter and the brotherhood, how likely are we to have conversations with each other about things going on in our life? And when are we having these conversations? Are we having these conversations at meeting? Are we having these conversations 2 a.m. at a party after we're drunk? Are we having these in closed rooms where nobody can hear us? Do I just share information on social media or just through texting, and I never really talk to people about what's going on in my life? And so I think that is a really difficult conversation at times, but I think it's really interesting in the way that we communicate. And I would challenge people to be more vulnerable with each other, because conversations can feel really tough until we start to have them and we become more comfortable approaching people about things. The barriers to tough conversations, once again, I wrote participate, but I just wrote down a few things that I think are barriers to people having tough conversations about mental illness, about breakups, about death in the family, but also positive things. But I think a lack of closeness or openness with brothers. Like if I was talking to you right now and I said, if you were experiencing a really difficult breakup, what brothers would you reach out to? And maybe you have a few brothers, maybe you have one brother, but maybe you don't have any brothers you would share with. I think that is really important to know. And I think it's a really good way to check in with yourself about where things are at with you and the brotherhood. I put down dudes don't talk about their feelings. That is something I hear all the time. And then I have one that I think is totally honest. I wouldn't know what to say if I was concerned about another brother, or if I was struggling, I wouldn't know how to talk to somebody. So I think that those are fair. So I have my quick personal share. I'll make it really brief, but I did want to really emphasize the fact that this is important conversations. So when I was rushing in 2011, I had a pledge class of, I think, 6 different people at Eastern Michigan. One of them was a good friend named ADH. Those are his initials. And we were good friends for years. He went to the military. We talked while he was in the military. And then when he came back to finish school, we were continuing to work on projects, and we were developing this thing called Character Talk, where we would share and open up the floor for guys to have different conversations about different things that were impacting them. And at first, it didn't really work out. And then I think people started to buy in. They started to be open and honest. And so I definitely started this conversation and this type of character talk with one of my pledge brothers. Unfortunately, as he was graduating, and I was a roommate with him at the time, ADH did pass away. He did take his own life. And that was really, really difficult. This was a person that was very goofy, very fun, but also really, really struggled. And he was the person that was having these conversations. And so I do want to emphasize a little piece that conversations are really hard, and a lot of these topics are really difficult. But they are important conversations, and they do impact men, and they do impact our fraternity. And so I think that tough conversations are needed, even when it's hard. So what was the purpose of this personal share? So I mentioned a few of those pieces, but I do want to mention the idea that oftentimes as men, as brothers in a fraternity, we're very good at hanging out with each other, and I can't swear, shooting the shit, but we'll go to bars, we play sports. I don't play sports, but most people play sports. We do a lot of things together, but we often don't have these conversations. And unfortunately, a lot of brothers struggle quietly. And so once again, one of my goals is to teach people how to have these conversations that feels good and safe, because we care about our brothers at the end of the day. I did want to mention alcohol use is widely used and completely impacts our ability to make good decisions. And sometimes we have the only conversations that we have because we're under the influence of alcohol. And my goal would be that we can have more conversations when we're not drinking. So this looks like a lot. And one of my purposes in just kind of teaching a little bit about mental health symptoms was not necessarily to teach people how to diagnose other people, but I do want to spread some awareness about really how general and how much these symptoms we probably have had ourselves, whether we had a diagnosable mental disorder or we knew somebody that probably did. In order to be diagnosed with these, you have to meet certain criteria and they have to last a certain amount of time. But I think that anxiety and depression are the two biggest things that men and women and all folks tend to struggle with. And I think college is one of those really difficult times. So anxiety, or general anxiety disorder rather, has really key symptoms: really feeling restless, easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. And these have to cause significant distress. With depression, it's pretty much the same. There are several symptoms, and sometimes we experience them at different times, and sometimes these symptoms don't go away. And that's a really good opportunity to look into potentially getting some mental health treatment for that. So depression, for folks that aren't aware of the specific symptoms, are like a depressed mood of the day or out of the day, loss of interest in activities, changes to appetite, changes of energy, worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to concentrate, recurrent thoughts of death. And so, unfortunately, I think that we know a lot of people that have struggled with this. And I think a lot of men have also struggled with this silently. And so I think it's good to be aware of, and it's good to be educated at what these things look like. And it always strikes me as interesting when people come into the clinic and we give them a label for the things that they've been experiencing. I think that feels nice. I think it's just good to have language to describe the things that we've been experiencing. And when we have a label, then we're able to relate to other people. There are other people that experience depression, and we can find those people and we can join groups. And general anxiety disorder and depression are both things that impact us a lot. But they are things that are really treatable, particularly if we actively seek help and if we talk to each other about things. Quick facts and statistics. I'm just kind of rush through these because if you couldn't already tell based on the way that I've been presenting, these are very relevant to college students. But basically, they've done a bunch of research. They constantly are doing research on universities, trying to figure out what to do with their counseling and psychological services. Do they need additional funding? Do they need help? And unfortunately, universities really do struggle in helping people at different times because we're not always upfront about our symptoms. But ultimately, this is a big problem. And then for Greek life specifically, there are many folks that struggle silently. We do have quite a bit of mental illness and suicide attempts. So this is a very relevant problem. So I wanted to get into a little bit of action steps. So I think that we've been talking a lot about this idea of how to talk to somebody and why it's important, and we know that it's important, but what things can we actually do? So there are many different techniques and there are many things that work. But essentially, there's one called QPR. And a full disclaimer is that I'm brushing over this and that you can learn full suicide prevention models, usually through counseling and psychological services. They can bring in speakers. You can request that the university approaches this topic more seriously, and maybe they can bring somebody in and they can get trained and things like that. So basically 3 steps. The first step is to initiate the conversation. And I broke this down in a few different pieces because I really do want to emphasize suicide prevention, as I think that is the most relevant topic. But I do want to soften it a little bit in how to have these conversations in general. When approaching somebody, the most important things are to be direct, non-judgmental, seek somebody out in a comfortable place. So I completely understand if some individuals don't want to do this one-on-one, closed doors. So you can do this through text. I don't recommend it for talking to people about your suspicion that they might really be struggling with thoughts of suicide or serious depression. I do think that that would be better face-to-face. So if we do want to talk to somebody about suicide, it's important to be direct and honest. So QPR specifically has two different statements, and these are statements that I use all the time, and they can feel really strong, but we need to be open, we need to be honest. So two quick things. I would directly ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And I do want to note that asking those questions are direct. We're not talking about non-suicidal self-injury. I'm not asking if somebody wants to hurt themselves. That can mean anything. We're asking direct questions, and we're likely to get a direct answer. And then I do want to quickly dispel a myth. You're not going to introduce the idea of suicide to somebody that's depressed. It makes sense that that is a myth, but unfortunately, it's been debunked many, many times. Folks that have depression do think about death sometimes. They do think about taking their lives at times. And so you're not introducing something new. And then if you were not talking about suicide and you wanted to approach them about something else, I did write up something as well. So being direct, open up with something like, so I wanted to talk to you about something I've noticed lately. I've noticed that you've been drinking more than usual, or that you've missed chapter events. And I just wanted to see if you were doing okay. That is a little bit less direct than those suicide questions. But I think that it also initiates the conversation in a different way. It's expressing that I've noticed something in a non-judgmental way. You've been drinking more than usual. I've noticed that you were drinking pretty hard yesterday, or that you had drank this amount of alcohol. And do your best to not make it judgmental. Are you okay? And so, yes, that is very direct, but it opens up the conversation. If somebody were to approach me and say something like, I've noticed this, are you doing okay? It opens up the floor for me to be open and honest, particularly if you are being sincere. If somebody is willing to ask, I think that some people would be honest, and that's honestly what we're looking for. So the next step is persuade or show support. So after we initiate the conversation, we want to show them support. And there are many different ways to do this. But frankly, it's, I'm here for you. I want to support you. Here's my information. You can say something like, if you ever want to talk about things, know that I'm always here. I think that those things seem really simple, and I think that sometimes we say them casually, but I think in the context of the conversation where we initiated, I'm worried about you, this has been going on, I want to know if you're doing okay, here's my information so that if you ever need somebody to talk to, I'm here. And then if you're talking about suicide, we have that conversation, are you thinking about suicide? Then we can follow up with something, say, would you be willing to let me assist you? Would you let me help you in some way? Another option that I think is really important, and once again, it sounds silly, and there are certain things in therapy that sound silly to me, but they actually do work. This idea of asking folks, would you be willing to promise that you're not going to kill yourself today? Would you pinky promise? I think that sounds silly, but from my own experience in working with a lot of folks that struggle with suicide, this idea of making a promise is genuine and it works. And it's also a really good follow-up to helping somebody get the next step. So in this moment, I know that that person's safe because they were willing to promise me that they're not going to do it. And then I'm about to do one more step to kind of follow up this conversation. I'm going to refer them or give resources. And I think that it's really interesting because when we're at a university, we have access to a lot of resources, particularly when it relates to mental health. So I mentioned counseling and psychological services. As far as I know, this is readily available on most campuses. At Eastern Michigan University, you get 12 free sessions a semester. You have access to psychiatric medicine with trained psychiatrists and trained doctors, and that works within a billing plan that's manageable for students. And I think that that is such an important piece because we are really often, we're worried that talking to somebody or finding somebody to talk to that's a professional is going to be difficult. But I think at the university, it doesn't have to be. And we can get that free support, and we can get free sessions, and we can talk things out. And frankly, you don't need to have any symptoms of depression or anxiety. If you need to process through something because you're struggling, maybe you had a breakup, maybe things are not going well, you can always reach out. I think that is one of the most important things that we can do. So within the context of this conversation, I initiated the conversation. If I said, I'm really concerned about you, this is what I noticed, and I want to make sure that you're doing okay. Would you promise to keep safe in the next day? And they agree. They say, would it be okay if we called a suicide prevention line together? Would it be okay if I walked you down to CAPS? Would it be okay if we talked to the fraternity advisor about this? And depending on what that conversation is and what it looks like, I think that there's different ways to handle it. So explicitly, if we're talking about suicide, and I noticed that somebody was really depressed, I asked them the question explicitly, are you thinking about suicide? They say yes. The next step, I'm following up with them. I'm saying, well, I'm here to support you. I want to keep you safe. Would you be willing to do this? If it's not something that's suicide, maybe somebody's just struggling in classes. I noticed that you've been drinking more heavy than you usually do, and I'm really worried. They say, I'm struggling with classes. Maybe, would you be comfortable if we talk to the advisor? I know that the advisor has some really good ideas and has worked with folks before. So this whole aspect is initiate the conversation, support your friend, and then give them resources or send them to somebody that has resources. So I have a few scenarios. And once again, we could talk about them, but I will just pause and then I'll kind of fill you in what the answers are. So the first scenario in applying these skills. So you notice that Keith has been drinking a lot more than usual. I put an asshole. So he's been an asshole to everybody for the last week. Keith mentions they broke up with his girlfriend of 2 years after he found out that she cheated on him. It's Friday. You notice that Keith bought a half-gallon of pop-off vodka. While Keith is drinking at night, you notice he says something like, it's fine, life is meaningless anyway, chapter will need to find a new doctor after I'm gone. So what are the red flags? So there's quite a bit. And although this seems like a goofy scenario, and I name dropped the alcohol and I called somebody an asshole, frankly, I think that these are real situations that happen way too often. And we often notice that guys on Friday, Saturday, talk about having a really crappy week, and then they make really troubling statements and we become really concerned and they're drinking really heavily. And I often tell the guys that the best drinkers within our fraternity are sometimes the guys that are struggling the most. So I kind of combine those two. So what are the red flags of this scenario? Keith just broke up with his girlfriend. Breakups are really difficult. They're one of the things, major life changes, trauma, that's a red flag for suicide potentially. He has bought a half-gallon of pop-off vodka. Maybe that is something that people do sometimes, but that is a lot of alcohol, way, way, way too much than you'd ever need, particularly of pop-off vodka. And with Keith, he said some statements that I recognize as pretty concerning, and I think it makes sense when people that say these things, you'll need to find a new doctor after I'm gone. Life is meaningless. I hear drunk people say these things a lot, and sometimes it's really brushed off as Keith is Keith. But no, Keith is probably struggling. So how would you approach Keith? I think that there's 1,000 ways to do it. And as the advisor, I'm in a different situation than most people. But if it was me and I was active, I don't think that it's a good time to confront Keith. But also, I know that Keith is not in a good place, and I would want to make sure that Keith is not drinking more than he needs to. And maybe we can cut Keith off. So frankly, if I'm going to be honest, the way that I would handle it is I hear those things. Keith is way too drunk. Brothers, we're cutting Keith off. No more alcohol. Take his alcohol away. Take his keys away, and make sure that Keith is safe tonight. Not only for the alcohol, but while he's been drinking, he's making some problematic or depression-related statements, and we do want to keep him safe so that he doesn't hurt himself, he doesn't try any suicide, things like that. Another way of doing it, so the follow-up to that, would be talking to Keith the next day. So assuming that Keith isn't truly really hungover and he's ready to have that conversation, it's very, very important to approach Keith the next day, because Keith may very well still be struggling. It's likely that he is. So after I know that Keith is safe, Keith is able to talk to me, I reach out to him, I go to his house, maybe I bring another brother, but I wouldn't bring too many brothers. I don't want this to feel overwhelming. I want to keep this as personal as possible, but it might be okay if Keith, me, and Keith's really good friend all have an honest conversation about how we're really concerned about him, and we go over those 3 QPR aspects. So, Keith, we noticed that you've been drinking pretty hard, and we know that you just broke up with your girlfriend. That sounds really tough, and that really sucks. I'm really sorry that that happened. I want you to know that I'm really worried about you. I know that you really cared about your girlfriend, and you were drinking really hard. That's a judgment, but that's okay. And we just want to make sure that you're doing okay. Keith, have you been thinking about suicide? Have you been thinking about killing yourself lately? And I know that seems really direct, but honestly, that's what we need. So depending on what Keith says, if Keith said yes, then we acknowledge that we're here for him and we want him to get help, and ask him if it would be okay if we called the suicide hotline. Would you mind if we go to Capsmar? I'd love to walk you down there. We want you to be safe, and I want you to be here tomorrow. I think that there are a lot of things that we can say, but I think if we follow the QPR, then I think that we'll be in a really good place. We're showing people that we care. We're approaching them in a place that they're comfortable with. We're asking them direct questions, and we're trying to get them help in some way. I did make a note of this. Next week, Keith seems fine. He's in a better mood than he's been in a while. Keith starts giving away all his prized possessions, his PSK letters, despite his lease not being up, and he has another year in chapter. I wanted to include this because there is oftentimes with folks that are suicidal, once they make a plan to die by suicide, they say, I'm going to die in a week, but I want to take care of my affairs. They may very well perk up. They've made a plan. Life is fine because I have a plan to die. But before I die, I need to write some letters. I need to say a few things to a few people. I have it planned out. So why is that problematic? They could very well be suicidal still. We already know that Keith was struggling. Keith has said some things. Keith is drinking more. Keith just broke up with his girlfriend. And so I think that these things are all good things to be aware of. And I want to take a quick second to pause, because I think that this can often feel like a lot, but I think that in its most foundational root, it is just having conversations with people that we spend time with and care about to make sure that they're doing okay. And I don't think that we do this enough. And so although this conversation seems extreme and people might never have met a Keith and they might never in their life, I think that we're going to have friends that break up with significant others. We're going to have people that are constantly drinking week after week that are failing classes, and we know that they're failing classes because we check their grades. So a lot of these things is just being aware of how people are doing. And I love the fact that we can do these honest conversations and we can check in with each other, and we can have gripes and roses where I can have the opportunity to share what's going on in my life. And frankly, those might be the red flags. It's not uncommon when I run gripes and roses. Life is really crappy right now and I'm not doing well. And I'd love to hang out with you guys this week because it's going to be a tough one. And that's what I want for you guys. I want you guys to have conversations with each other and check in. I want you to feel encouraged to talk to people when things are struggling in your life. And I don't necessarily mean tell every single one of your brothers everything going on in your life, but find people in your life that you're willing to share things with. And I think for a lot of people, that's their significant other, and their significant other is the person they share everything with. But significant others don't always work out. They're not always there, and it's good to have a support system. And when we call ourselves brothers in a fraternity, we are a lifelong brotherhood, and that means something. So we need to watch out for our brothers. We need to care, I think, a little bit more than we do sometimes, and that's easier said than done. And I'm a therapist, so I can say that. Review, takeaway. I've been rambling. I sometimes do that. But college life is hard. Life is hard. But as brothers, we can make life more manageable together. Sounds really cheesy. It is. But I think that it's something that is really honest. The next point is be open and honest with your brothers, even if it's just one brother at a time. Just being able to get things off your chest can make a world of difference when you don't talk. And also, if you can't talk with your brothers right now, go talk with a therapist. QPR, or not QPR, CAPS, thank you. The next one, takeaway is QPR. Question, persuade, refer. Make contact, give people support, and then if it's appropriate, refer resources. But frankly, the first two work wonderfully. If I reach out to somebody and say, I've noticed you haven't been yourself and you missed a bunch of brotherhoods and you're usually there, I want you to know that I'm here for you if you need anything. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's great. So from EMU, Eastern Michigan University, I put 2 points. Character talk being the first one, gripes and roses being the second. Once again, gripes and roses. Gripes are negative, not ideal things. Roses are good things. End with rose for being damn proud. You can do this at chapter meeting. You can do this with your friends in a group when you guys are drinking. If you drink with me, sometimes I make you do gripes and roses so that I can check in with you. Seems weird, but I'm a therapist. And then the first part is character talk. So I mentioned this a few times, and for anybody that really likes this concept and wants to expand out, I love to talk about it more. Maybe I'll have the opportunity to present on it. But character talk is this idea that is different than brotherhood. So brotherhood, we're hanging out with each other. Character talk, we're getting to know each other. So character talk typically takes place in the chapter room or a big circle. It's always in this format of 3. It's really easy. It's an easy format, but it's really effective. First one's an icebreaker. So for example, if you had 3 brothers to protect the Phi-Sig Castle, our fraternity house, what 3 brothers would protect it from a zombie apocalypse? Really easy. Everybody answers. It's fun. It opens things up. The second part, we do a check-in. That's usually grapes and roses. I switch it up sometimes and say, name something that's not going well in life right now and one thing that you're really excited about. And everybody answers that one as well. I encourage people for the check-in, be as open and honest as you can, and then things will go a lot better. And then the third part is the discussion part. So the discussion, I put discussion of talk, gross. So a discussion can be on anything. So we've talked about brotherhood. We've talked about masculinity. And for people that are like, that's a really weird conversation to have. The idea of any conversation that we have is to talk about things that are relevant. So depending on how well certain topics work, they work really well. And I can give you more topics later. But to give you an example, I'll use the masculinity one. Some of my favorite ones, it surprises people because it's not always people's favorite topic at first. But this idea that often growing up as men, we grow up with expectations and we're told things, and we are often raised to be a certain type of man, and that can differ from household to household, but ultimately we're often raised to be a certain type of man. And so I had an entire discussion on Character Talk about what it was like, what was one life lesson your dad told you growing up, or your mom, or a guardian, somebody like that. And then the discussion talk, we just talked about how hard it can be sometimes to be a dude today. And I don't mean that as like dudes are the most discriminated against group ever. I mean that in the sense that having conversations like Character Talk or having talks about how things are going in life can be really hard because we're told that men don't cry, men don't talk about their feelings. So this discussion of masculinity often becomes whatever you want it to be based on how people react to it. And my advice for that in getting to know brothers is have the speaker, the Character Talk chairman, present the topic and then be willing to share. But Character Talk is a really good way to have honest and open discussions with each other about a lot of topics and to check in with each other. So that is all I have. I did change the format a little bit because I expected it to be a lot more discussion based. I'm not a lecturer, but if anybody is interested in this topic, has questions, feel free to reach out to the 2 folks here, Drew and Devin. They can give you my contact. And I'd love to be able to talk more about how we can have honest and open conversations and be more honest about things when we're not doing well. So thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight and for leading the conversation on having tough conversations, talking to your brothers who might need some extra support or who might need some help, and giving us some tools and tips on how to start those conversations, right? Like you said, it can be hard to broach those conversations because we're so, in a lot of ways, talk about those different things and not talk about our emotions, not talk to other men about how we're feeling. But like you said, we're in a fraternity. We have this close-knit group of men that we are supposed to feel are as close to us as brothers. And if we can't talk to our brothers about what's going on, who can we talk to? So for those of you who watch this as a recording. This is a great conversation starter and a way to think about what you all can do in your chapter to help facilitate these conversations, whether to build skills as an individual or to facilitate this as a part of your chapter culture as a group conversation as well. So before we wrap up, does anyone have any questions or points of interest to add before we wrap up for the day?
I can give Chris my thoughts offline, but no, I think it's a very important conversation to have. I actually lost two brothers, ADH along with Chris and Justin that are here, and also my big brother Julian. And I can tell you that I did not know how to handle it the first time. Reaching out, looking back now, reaching back, if I would have maybe had some conversations with Caps or even other brothers instead of bottling it up. I think some things would have gone a little bit differently when I was an undergrad. But it's very, very important topic. And I really encourage you guys to definitely take some of the tips that Chris said and run with it. Keep it going in your individual chapters.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And thank you, Chris, for bringing this topic up. I think it's crucially important now and will continue to be as we can see a ever-changing digital world and people are removed from that interpersonal time. I think just a reminder that whenever we're watching this in the future, it's okay not to be okay, and there's strength and vulnerability, and to bring that up with the people that you trust most. There's people around you who love you, want to support you, and it's hard to think that you get extra points just for going through something on your own. So just make sure you get a team around you because they want to be there to support you too.
All right. Thank you, Matt, Justin, Devin, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Chris, for joining us and leading the conversation. And I hope you all have a good night. Thank you.